Welcome back to Behind the Play. My name is Alex Adams, and today I'm very excited to introduce our guest, Jeff Hamilton, who covers the Jets for the Winnipeg Free Press. Thanks so much, Jeff, for taking the time and coming on. How's it going?
Alex, great to be on. Things are going well, man. Here in Winnipeg, we're starting to finally see a bit of spring. It got to about 10 degrees today, which is super nice. It's still brisk at night, but with playoff hockey now around the corner here, it's Christmas in April right now. So it's all things coming up Winnipeg for what otherwise is a pretty cold month right now.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think they say in Manitoba gets more days of sun than California, so maybe it's sunnier here or there in Winnipeg than it is in Las Vegas, where you're going to be covering the Jets. I first want to ask a little bit about your career. When did you first think you might want to pursue a career in sports journalism?
It's a good question. It's a bit of a long answer, but
No, no.
I'll try to. I won't speed it up, but I'll give. It's funny because I was playing junior hockey and I was 21 years old, and I don't even know if I knew what journalism was, like the actual word, like to describe. I mean, I knew reporting, I knew what an anchor was, stuff like that, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. At 21, I had just finished junior hockey. I'd broken pretty much every bone in my body, and now I was about to take my skills, if you will, into the classroom and off the rink, and so I was deciding on what I wanted to do. I think like anybody, who doesn't know exactly what they want to do, they kind of look at what their interests are, what do they do in their life? How can you do something that you already enjoy? And I obviously love sports. I was a hockey player, but I played all kinds of sports growing up. I was a pretty competitive soccer player as well, but played everything. But more importantly, I would watch TSN like 3 times a day. Like I'd watch the same segment over and over and over again. And I remember thinking to myself, maybe I could do that. And I'm pretty sure I Googled like how to get a job at TSN or something like that, just to figure out what this role was and whatnot. And that led me to, a handful of journalism schools. And I ultimately figured out what journalism meant and what degree I would need if I wanted to do that. So that was kind of my original goal. And ultimately, just wanting to continue to have some kind of role in sports. So I enrolled in Carleton Journalism School in Ottawa, went down there and, in 2008, graduated in 2012. It was a great 4 years. Learned a lot of great things. I think my biggest takeaway from Carleton was with the education was you need to learn the rules before you break them, and I think that was the most important lesson I learned in my 4 years. But just really developed a passion from there. It started off as, again, just something I thought maybe I wanted to do, and I thought it would be fun to really seeing what the opportunities were in journalism. And as my career has gone on now, we're coming up at about, I've been a journalist for more than 10 years now. It's just from those 4 years, it's just I learned a lot about what could happen, what kind of journalist I could be, wanted to be, and certainly over the years have developed those skills and been able to do a lot of cool things in my profession.
And you mentioned that you played hockey as a junior player, and also you played a bunch of other sports. Love TSN. With that, how does that, maybe being a fan and just being an athlete, shape how you write, or does that have an impact on your writing and maybe even your process?
I don't know so much if it has a. I think that was the part that I needed to learn how to do, was the writing process. I was always, I think a lot of people in this profession, particularly in the print industry, I was always a good writer, but I wasn't like a good newspaper writer. Like I love to write short stories. I wrote poetry in high school. I wrote, I can look back at a couple different projects I did during grade school, and whether it was a book report or a monologue for a book report. Like I was always interested in those things. I used to write rap lyrics with my buddies in grade 7. Like it just was always, my creative outlet was always writing, but I don't think I actually knew how to write. And that's why I kind of bring up the know the rules before you break them. So to answer your question, I don't think it so much shaped my writing, but it shaped my interests. And I really do think you need to enjoy what you're covering. Certainly, having played various sports, it gives you a good foundation on how to cover them. Like, just being able to understand the game, the rules, all those things. I mean, those, you can certainly cover a sport having not played it. And what I mean by that is you can certainly learn different sports and the different rules and nuances, but being able to play that, competing at a a good level, being in that competition, it kind of puts you in there a little bit. Now I'm not comparing myself to NHL athletes or come anywhere close to that degree or level of sport, but I think there are some similarities in competitive sports in general. So I'd say less about the writing and more so about just understanding the game, understanding what maybe some of the players are going through, some of the challenges. Like I use as an example, like having been a power play player in hockey, I know what happens when a power play isn't going for you. I know how much momentum it can suck out of your team, out of you as an individual. It's just an example. So it's like it's just more so experience and interest. And I really do. I'll go back to my original point. I really do think you need to be interested in what you're writing about to be, for it to sing or it to be good. You can definitely get by and fake it on certain things, but I think the best writers are those who have the biggest passion in that sport. And certainly, sports was a big passion in my life and something I wanted to continue in my professional career, whatever way that would be, and turned it out to be writing.
You've also written not only about obviously the Jets, but you've written stories about sexual predation in hockey, and you've really uncovered a lot of stories about kind of sexual predators in hockey. Maybe tell us how you came about finding these stories and what made you want to investigate the stories that you did.
So, I was somebody who always liked to go beyond the game story. Like I really think it's something that I don't like writing something that doesn't interest me. And if it's not exciting, if it's not, and I'm not trying to say, researching, investigating sexual predators is some kind of exciting endeavor, but it's something that, you learn with journalism, just the power in which you can tell stories. And so when I say go beyond the game story, I want to write stories with depth. I want to write stories that have emotion, that have meaning, that can impact people's lives, that can change people's lives, that can improve people's lives, that can change the way institutions do work. Those are kind of some of the early things you learn in journalism school, but it's not until you get the opportunity to actually do some of that work that you do fully understand the power. And so you're right. I've been fortunate to work at at the Winnipeg Free Press that's seen that talent in me, has certainly given me the resources and time and attention. And it's, as much as my name's on a lot of these investigations, it's a lot of hands at play, whether that's copy editors, whether that's editors that help shape the story and form it. I mean, there's a investigatives editor named Scott Gibbons at the Winnipeg Free Press who I work closely with. He's just a terrific editor when it comes to doing that investigative work. And so really how it got on my radar was just I think my editors understood that I needed something a little bit deeper. I needed to sink my teeth into something. And this would have been in around, trying to do the math now, 2016, 2017. So a couple of years after I got hired at the Winnipeg Free Press. And what really kind of catapulted me, if you will, into the investigative side of journalism was I got to spend 3 years, not exclusively, but a lot of time within those 3 years working on a series that covered sexual predator Graham James. It was called A Stain on Our Game, and it was a 6-part series. Again, it took me a few years to finish, thousands of phone calls, thousands of hours of tape and talk, and so that process, it really is. It's not for everybody. I mean, particularly the subject matter. It's not an easy subject matter to dive into, to be a big part of your life for a long stretch of time. But I've been lucky enough to talk with a lot of investigative reporters, not just in this province, but across the country, and we all kind of have the same thing in common. We just have this deep desire to do right and to uncover things, issues, and to better people's lives. And certainly I definitely got that through the Graham James series over those 3 years. And then again, like that catapulted me into becoming somebody who can not just, it's one thing to be able to do the work, but it's another thing to be able to show people you can do the work, because there's a level of empathy you need to have in your writing, in investigative reporting, and particularly around substance abuse issues, domestic abuse, sexual abuse, all those things, that it takes a lot of trust, right? It takes a lot of trust within the subject to trust the writer to tell their story, because a lot of people don't know what that looks like. They don't know if you have a conversation with me for 15 minutes or a half an hour or 45 minutes or several conversations over a stretch of time, how is all that conversation going to look like on print? And so I think one of the things that certainly benefited me from that standpoint was being able to show that series that I did, to be able to show what it looks like to have a conversation, and how I write about it. And so I really just got hooked on it from there. And it's really been an important part of my career. It's been a priority of mine. I do love covering games. I kind of balance the two. One's more of like the toy department of covering professional sports teams, and then you kind of get into the shit of it on the other side. And so for me, it really does balance each other. And it's actually made me a better reporter on the sports side, because I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I think there's a hesitancy to challenge athletes, and there's a particularly people who are new to the beats and stuff like that. It can be an intimidating exercise to walk into a locker room full of millionaires, people who make a ton of money, who have all kind of lived their whole life kind of being celebrated, right? And to challenge them, and to be be the kind of reporter that fans expect you to be, right? I mean, there's some fans that expect you to be rah, but there's a lot of fans out there that want to get the truth, want to get, find out what the journalism is in sports. And so having done those other investigations, having what I would actually call difficult questions and conversations with people, then to bring that into an NHL locker room, it makes it seem like a real big breeze. So I use the two things to really balance out almost my mental health, because you can't be in the thick of this, deep investigations all the time, and that's all you're doing. Like, just as a side note to that, I mean, I finished that 3-year investigation, and I did 6 months of therapy, just to just to unpack some of the stuff that I went through during that investigation. Now, I was lucky enough to have support from all across the country, and as someone who had done therapy as a earlier in my life, I knew the benefits of doing that. So it wasn't like I was running towards needing therapy sessions after it, but I knew the importance of unpacking. It turned out to be a really important thing. So it's just a roundabout way of saying, it's just I like to have this happy balance of, okay, walking in and covering scores and covering pro teams, and everyone's smiling, especially when they're winning, versus covering a little bit of the harder stuff that involves like a lot of emotion, a lot of very serious and then sometimes illegal behavior. So I tickle both fancies: the need to be an investigative reporter and everything that comes with that, and at the same time enjoying covering teams and being on the road, and that includes the Winnipeg Blue Bombers as well, as I get a chance to cover kind of both of the pro teams in the city. So I really do have, in my opinion, the best of both worlds.
Yeah, no, of course. And like, as a therapist to be, I appreciate you talking about that, as like, I think it's really important to do. And as well, just to go off that, you mentioned there's a lot of different things I've taken from what you've just said, but you mentioned challenging and creating relationships. And how did you create relationships in the investigative sense, of the people that you had on? And maybe how is that similar and different to the relationships when you're challenging players like maybe Mark Scheifele for not back checking or whatever the case?
Right. So
how do you create those relationships?
Two very different approaches, I would say. I mean, certainly with the investigative stuff, you just come from a place where I try to, because a lot of the times the people I'm interviewing feel powerless in the situation, right? Whether they've been abused, whether they have addictions, issues, to this day or whatever at the moment I was talking to them. So a lot of them feel powerless in their own stories. So the way I try to, when I get asked that question, I think the most important part in gaining trust, with sources, with people, for investigative work, is to give them all the power in the conversation. And what I mean by that is I'm, no one has to talk to me. I think there's, and again, I don't want to speak for any journalists. I don't, I'm not in on anybody else's phone calls, so I don't know this, but I do think there's a tendency and I think that's why it takes time and patience, right? Because a lot of the times under tight deadlines, editors might want it now, right? And so that might result in quick question asking, or you talk to them for a little bit and all of a sudden you're getting into it, and you don't know what it's like, what it's like to approach these kind of, you don't know what's going to trigger them, you don't know, like, and it can't be self-serving. It's not like you're going in there to tell your story, you're essentially going in and telling their story. So I make it very, very, very clear right off the bat that they don't owe me anything, that they don't have to talk to me, that it's it can start with a conversation. And what I like to do is I like to say I'll work with you every step of the way. So I don't want you to think that, I want you to talk freely in a conversation so that you're not guarded on certain things, or not as much as you would naturally be if you didn't know where I was going. And then after that, it becomes a long process. It becomes a process of, and it depends on the subject. It depends on where they fit in the story, how prominent they are in the story and all those things. But I like to stay in contact with them, and then walk them through what I think is of value from their interviews, and what I think is of value to the story and to other people who will read it. And then we work together. And so that really, in my opinion, is the way of building trust. There's been lots of examples where, and I live up to my word. There are times where and I use the word push lightly. Like, it's not like you're pushing them to like convincing them, but in some cases you are kind of trying to do a better job of showing them the benefits, right? Because I think there's an inherent feeling that, I don't want to say this, or this, this could be an issue. And so you work with them on why you might want their name used, why you might want certain aspects of a story that may seem difficult to talk about, and explain why you want those in the story, right? And then again, you let them make the final decision. So at the end of the day, they're the ones who have the power over their story. They're the ones who have the power to make the decisions. And then, again, I'll echo something I said before. Sometimes it's being able to show them some of the work I've done. And so then that's a big part of building trust when it comes to those investigative work, because now they can see what it looks like. They can see how somebody writes it. It's not an idea in their head now, and they can actually visualize it. Now with the players, sometimes it's just, and again, it's just kind of understanding that, asking a guy why he's not back checking, or asking him where his defensive game is at, like when you've dealt with this other stuff, like in my mind, I'm thinking that's not a big deal at all. Like, why would, like, this is a game. Like, why would anybody be bothered? Like, why would you be bothered if I asked you about a crappy second period? Like, if players if we are to believe every player who says that their own harshest critic, then I don't need to work with this player or whatever. In the relationship building, though, in that aspect, there are going to be tense moments. There are going to be tense moments with players. There's going to be tense situations. There's going to be situations as a reporter that you don't really want to get into, or might not be comfortable, or you might not be feeling that day, but you just push through it. And if a player wants to be snarky with you, they're snarky with you. I find that, in my opinion, if you're true to yourself, they end up respecting you at the end of the day, regardless, even if you have the battles. And I've seen this in the past. It almost seems like the people who headbutt each other and butt heads, like in interviews, turn out to end up having an incredible amount of respect for each other by the end of it. It's just, I think it's the players are the best who understand we have a job to do. I think as reporters, we also need to understand that players are human as well. And so in that respect, I think it's just handling yourself the right way, being able to write ask the right questions in the right kind of manner that's going to elicit the best answers, right? In some cases, it's not telling a player exactly what you want what you're writing about, but you're letting them know early on, this is the story I'm looking to do, so that they're not wondering in their head, why is he asking me this question or this question and this question? Because a lot of players get kind of taught, whether it's from their media departments or whether it's from, media training at the beginning of the year, I think they're kind of told to be a little bit safe with reporters. Like, don't say everything and don't be too honest, right? And it only takes getting burnt once to kind of not want to open yourself up and be honest. So I as a journalist, I try to, although I take a different approach to the players than I would in investigative work, of course, I'm just a little bit more straightforward with the players. Like you don't want to beat around the bush and talk about. You just want to, and I think a lot of players like when they say about coaches who tell them honesty, like brutal honesty with players is appreciated from their coaches, so they know exactly where they stand. I'm not gonna I'm not going to relate my relationship with players as similar to the coaches, but I will in the sense of the process, and that being straight up, not beating around the bush, because what you're asking about and what the information you're looking for, if you're coming at it at a certain approach, and then in your story it's a completely different tone or something like that, that becomes a bit of a disconnect and a lack of trust for sure with players.
And you mentioned that you think that journalists need to be kind of honest, especially in the sports realm, and obviously it's a bit different with investigative reporting. What other advice would you give to maybe young journalists coming up in the industry?
I'll repeat it because I do think it's incredibly important. I think you need to learn the rules before you break them. And I've said that a few times here, but what I mean by that is you just need to know some of the rules around journalism, so that you're not. I find a lot of people that come into the industry want to do something exciting, or they want to be Stephen A. Smith right away. You know what I mean? Like, it's just you can get too into it too quickly. Try to be a voice, right? I find with journalism it's heading more towards opinion and less about reporting. And so that's kind of what I mean by like the rules first. Like, learn the rules of being a reporter before you get into being a columnist, or talking about how this player, is so and so, or that, injecting yourself or your opinion into a piece. As far as building relationships, I think what worked for me, was having, like, I always had a confidence to me. Like, you know, I don't want to compare it to dating, but like, you hear a lot of people, like, you like someone who's confident, you like someone who carries himself confidently. And I think that, it can be a nerve wracking. And I certainly, when my you know, first ever experiences in an NHL locker room or a CFL locker room, like, it was daunting. Like, I'd gone through my 4 years of journalism school, and I'd practiced a lot of interviewing and stuff, but there's nothing that quite gets you ready for a locker room like that. But I always presented myself with confidence, and it's not false confidence. It's confidence built on preparation. Preparation in what the story you want to do, the questions you want to ask. So all those things, like writing down your questions, understanding what your story idea is, but not being married to a story idea either, because there's got to be some flexibility there. If it changes or what people say, like, you're not trying to write a story and then go, I want this player to say this right here, right, and try to elicit a certain answer. So another big piece of advice, which sounds obvious, but it can be very challenging sometimes, is to listen to what your subject is saying. Because a lot of times when you're new at your job, you ask a question and you're almost kind of like, phew, I asked that, I was able to get the question out. I'm not listening to the answer. I'm just saying the next question in my head so I don't forget it. I've definitely been guilty of that in the past. I think what you want to do is you want to listen to your subject, and then not necessarily go on a checklist of questions, because there might be something that they say in that answer that might be an entirely interesting tidbit, different from your story or related to your story, that you might want to explore, and might not just make your story better, might even make a different story a different, better story. So simply listening to subjects, while sound incredibly obvious, is actually a very important piece of advice that I could give prospective journalists for sure.
And what's maybe been your most memorable moment of your career?
I don't. So a couple different moments. I was working at the Free Press for like 2.5 weeks when I got sent to Anaheim for the Jets.
Mm-hmm.
First playoff run in 2015. That was incredible. It might not even have been 2 weeks. It might have been within a
Wow.
week. Like, I think I was told something like 48 or 72 hours after getting the job that I was going to Anaheim to help out with the playoffs. Now, that was obviously the Jets' first playoff game, first playoff series rather, and it was super exciting to be a part of. But there's other memorable stuff. I mean, I've been able to see, the Bombers win 2 Grey Cups and go to 3. That was really cool. I mean, particularly 2019, busting what was a 28-year Grey Cup drought, to finally have the Bombers, cross the finish line. That was incredibly cool. I bring up that 3-year investigative series I did. I was very fortunate to be recognized for a couple national awards, and so that was certainly memorable. An opportunity. It's not about winning awards, but they certainly help put your name on the map, put your paper on the map. And certainly are moments where you reflect back at your career. Tons of other stuff include like just being able to go to different cities. You know, I can remember being in journalism school, and wanting to be a sports reporter, wanting to be everybody, whether it's sports or otherwise, wants to be a traveling reporter. Like every single person, it's just, and anyone who's ever expressed that want has been told by people that it's impossible, that it's not going to happen, that it's very rare that you get that opportunity and all that stuff. And I remember being told by, not necessarily professors, I don't think there was any professors that were doing that, but certainly, students who were older than me, students of my own, student of my own age, people who I was around who told me in the past that that's just, not doable. And then, to have gone to pretty much, I think I need 2 more of the rinks, so the 32 rinks in the NHL, and obviously all the CFL stadiums. I mean, by my mid 30s, that's certainly a memorable piece of it. I was there for Sidney Crosby's 1,000 points in Pittsburgh. I was there for Alexander Ovechkin's moving into second. He was both were against the Jets, so I happened to find myself at both those games covering them. Those are memorable moments. So, but really, man, every day is memorable because it's when you love what you do. I know it sounds cliche, but when you love what you do, every day is a good day, and that's certainly the case a lot of the time for my work, for sure.
And I'm sure you're very excited to see the Jets in the playoffs with fans for the first time in what, 3-4 years now. I wanted to talk about the Jets. They're obviously playing the Golden Knights. How should the Jets feel about their matchup against the Golden Knights? And are the Golden Knights maybe a good matchup for the Jets?
Well, if you're reading other pundits around the league and stuff, they got this series as a coin flip. It's supposed to be the closest. I mean, this is all based on underlying numbers and whatnot and analytics, and they have the Jets being pretty close to the Vegas Golden Knights as far as those underlying numbers. Ultimately, what they're saying is the Jets' record isn't as bad as it suggests, and the Vegas Golden Knights' record isn't as good as it suggests. So, whether or not that proves to be true, we'll figure out here over the next week or two. I think like many people in this city, it's just going to be a really exciting atmosphere to get the whiteout parties back. I think, with COVID and just how much it's affected everybody, and particularly their joy level in life, to get those street parties back outside, to get that atmosphere back in Canada Life Center. There really is no better atmosphere, in my opinion, in the NHL, and really no better arena for it because of how small it is. And it doesn't work well as far as attendance and whatnot. You want to probably have more seats, but as far as an atmosphere goes, it really is second to none. And as far as I think with the Jets' chances, I mean, I think you have to be confident if you have a guy like Connor Hellebuyck between the pipes. I mean, that's we know how important goaltending is in the NHL, and all those crucial things to being a good team just get magnified in the playoffs. And so if Connor Hellebuyck can play the way Connor Hellebuyck's played in the past, certainly gives the Jets an opportunity. It's obviously very interesting that Laurent Brossoit is in the net for Vegas, and while I think a lot of people are looking at him as being the understudy to Hellebuyck, and how this is an easy matchup for the Jets as far as who's in net, and rightfully so. You ask 10 people, they're going to take Connor Hellebuyck 10 out of 10 times. But Laurent Brossoit, while a short sample or a small sample size, is 7-0-3 in 11 games. Obviously didn't get a decision on one of those, but hasn't lost in regulation time. Has certainly been great down the stretch. So we'll see. I think that's one of the juicier storylines. There's a lot of Winnipeggers on Vegas, including Mark Stone, and he's going to be back now after missing, a ton of time with back surgery. So that's going to be an exciting, plot line. Jack Eichel for Vegas getting his first taste of playoff hockey. So there's, I think the Jets, just to answer the question, beyond Connor Hellebuyck and why they should be confident, I think if they can have their top line going of Mark Scheifele and Pierre-Luc Dubois and Kyle Connor, if they can be the Jets' best players as they are, then the Jets are in a really good spot. And I'll add the power play, because the Jets 5-on-5 even strength goals are hard to come by in the playoffs. The Jets aren't exactly the most dominating 5-on-5 team, so if they can get their power play up to snuff in the same level as their penalty kill right now, then yeah, I think they're confident. But they're going to have their hands full. The Vegas Golden Knights are a fast team. They plug up the middle. They don't give up a lot. And while they might not have the advantage in goal, they certainly have a better defensive group in front of their goalie, and a group and a deep group of forwards that can certainly are certainly a big reason why they finished top in the Western Conference.
How much do you think Rick Bowness will rely on Josh Morrissey against the Golden Knights? Could he maybe even be playing 30 minutes a night?
Possibly, he's definitely one of the guys. I think him and Nikolai Ehlers are the two, and Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think, are the three guys. And you can add Mark Scheifele in there. I think the expectation is Mark Scheifele to be a good playoff player. We've seen it in the past. Certainly, Jets fans will want to see it this time around. But Josh Morrissey is one of those guys where he absolutely was on fire through the first half of the season. Like he was playing incredibly well. Was up there with defensive points. And then that his production, particularly on the defensive side, started to trend the other way in the last second half. And while we certainly saw great moments from Josh throughout the second half of the season, he'd provide that emotional spark when the Jets needed it at times and all that kind of stuff. I think he's going to have to bring his best game. And to your point, Alex, I think he is capable of playing 30 minutes, and there's no doubt in my mind, depending on how the game goes and where the game goes, he will be leaned on heavily because there is no waiting for next round, so they're going to use him. Josh is certainly capable of logging big minutes, and I'm excited to see what he can do because this is the first time we're seeing a Josh Morrissey play playoffs as that offensive juggernaut. What's he going to bring to the table offensively? We know exactly how good he can be defensively. We know he's going to play against the other team's top players. What can he do on the other end of the ice to tip the scales in the Jets' favor? And if he can do anything close to what he was doing in the first half of the season, it will bode incredibly well for the Jets for sure.
And as well, to touch on Bowness and the matchups, which line do you think Bowness will play against? Maybe the Eichel line and kind of shut them down or try to shut them down?
You know what? It's funny. I've been thinking about that a lot over the last day and a half, and really since the Vegas Golden Knights were determined to be the Jets' first round matchup. I think it's going to be very different depending on what arena you're in. Obviously, when it's your arena, you get last change. So in Winnipeg, I think Rick Bowness is going to want to match that line with Jack Eichel, their top line, with Lowry's line, with Nino Niederreiter and Mason Appleton. They've proven to be a great checking line. They've been proven to be a great shutdown line, but they've also proven to have a bit of offense here. So I would classify that if they can add some offense while shutting down that top line, and I'm going to say it's probably going to be the plan at home for game 3 and 4. We'll see what happens with 1 and 2. But if they can do that, that's kind of the areas to win in the playoffs. You need to get contributions from areas you don't expect every night. And I think that if the third line of Adam Lowry, Nino Niederreiter, and Mason Appleton can chip in offensively while also taking on those big defensive minutes against the other team's top line, then I think that is certainly in that category of contributions from places that you don't necessarily expect every night. What's going to happen in game 1 and 2, I have no idea, but I have this as far as matching because the Vegas is going to get that decision, and I don't think they're going to want to match their top line with Adam Lowry's line. I think they're going to want to go up against the Mark Scheifele, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Kyle Connor line. And we've seen Jack Eichel. He's got 66 points this year. He led the Vegas Golden Knights with 66 points. They don't have anybody with 70 plus points, but 47 of those 66 were even strength. And so if I'm Bruce Cassidy on the bench of the Vegas Golden Knights, I'm putting out my top line with Jack Eichel against their top line and hoping to end up on net positive. Because if you take the Jets' top line out of it, then you're putting a lot of pressure on some of those other lines to perform offensively. And I think that's where things could certainly get interesting. And I'll throw in one more wrinkle with Rick Bowness. Assuming they can't match lines the way they want to match lines, the Jets for the first game in particular, first 2 games. I think if it goes sideways, you could see the blender out real quick.
Okay.
I think that I'm not saying they wouldn't go back to it in game 2 or back to it in game 3 or game 4, the lines they have now, which I like the look of the lines. But if things go sideways in one of those games, I could see Rick Bowness switching things up, changing personnel, maybe moving a Nino Niederreiter up the lineup and creating a little bit of a different look so they're not matching necessarily skill on skill and are playing a little bit more of a balanced lineup. against some of their top guns, and not having, because what we've seen from, well, certainly Mark Scheifele, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Kyle Connor are the most gifted players, along with Nikolai Ehlers, offensively on this team. They're not exactly known for their defensive prowess. So if the scales start getting tipped against Winnipeg, I could see Rick Bowness being quick to bring out the blender and shake things up.
Do you think that means that Mark Scheifele would return to being a centerman? And I mean, a lot of Jets fans are pretty maligned with his defensive impact as a center. So what do you think about that?
It could be. I mean, it could be. It certainly could be Mark going back to center. It could be. It could be him staying on the wing. I mean, I look more at like that third line, like that, like, and particularly Nino Niederreiter. Like I look at him as a guy who has that offensive punch. And if they're not dominating, then they're not, dominating the third line and getting that offense. Or more importantly, if the top lines aren't generating that offense the way Rick Bowness wants to generate offense, which is get to the net, get the puck on net, get some of those dirty goals, right? They're not all going to be fancy, despite evidence against it. The Jets can't pass the puck over the goal line. Like they need to play some dirtier hockey, and that's, essentially playoff hockey. I just think more bringing a different attitude to the lines, rather than necessarily, whether it's, skill player like a Mark moving back to center or on the wing.
And how much of an impact could the Jets fans is it the MTS Center? I think they changed it.
Canada Life Center now. Yeah.
Canada Life Center and the Whiteout have potentially on this series against the Golden Knights, just such a electric crowd.
Massive. Like it's such an important piece to the puzzle. I would say, as someone who's been to a majority of the arenas in the league, T-Mobile and Canada Life Center, Vegas Golden Knights fans, Jets fans are the two loudest fan bases, like, in the arena. So like every night is going to be like, and I understand how hard it is to play. It can be daunting for teams to come in. I think it's especially daunting if you feel like you're outmatched by the team. You know what I mean? Like if you go into Boston and you're the 8th seed and they've been, handing everybody their lunch all season long. Well, Boston's even scarier. I almost look at these two environments and I can see them, because two teams that I think are confident within their own right will enjoy these atmospheres. So I do think it does obviously help the home team, because I think in those moments where you don't feel like you have maybe that extra gear or that extra thing like that, the crowd can literally lift you. Like it shakes in there, and because it's such a small building, it's just that noise is even more magnified. So it certainly will play a role, but don't kid yourself that the Jets aren't enjoying some of the atmosphere in Vegas, and vice versa. Some of the Golden Knights are enjoying that atmosphere in Winnipeg, because both are just incredible atmospheres. And and you can almost hear the party outside from inside. Like the buildings shake. Like I remember players talking about, like, even during the COVID playoffs, when fans weren't allowed in the arena for playoffs, they could hear the fans outside. So so there's a lot of players certainly who haven't experienced, and there's a handful of them for sure. They're very much looking forward, and to those who have experienced the whiteout, I mean, they've been waiting for this since the last one. So certainly a special time and a special crowd, and will definitely have an impact, I believe, in game 3 and 4 for sure.
And maybe what's your prediction in the series? Like, do you think the Jets will win this series?
My prediction, so I guess if it's a yes or no answer, I don't think they win the series.
Okay.
I do have them going to game 7. I think it's going to be a tightly contested game. I just don't see them winning in 5. Like I don't see the Vegas winning in 5. The Jets push the envelope there, I think. But then it's going to be tough to beat Winnipeg in game 6. So my logic is game 7, home ice advantage, winner takes all. I know Jets fans might not want to hear that, but I think that's a successful season for the Jets. I mean, it's not ideal, but if you can push the first team in the West 7 games, heck, if you can get past them, definitely a solid mark. But I've read a lot about the series from different people, and I don't know. I obviously buy into the tightly contested affair. When you look at it, the Vegas Golden Knights have more experience, and I think that's going to be the difference here. It's going to be that ability to ride the highs and lows of a series. The Jets have proven to not do that so well sometimes. They almost get too high when they're high, and certainly too low when when things aren't going well. So just given the experience that Vegas has, I know there's not a ton of guys left from that 2018 run, but they do have a lot of guys that have played a lot of playoff games, a lot of veterans, particularly on the blue line, that have played and won Stanley Cups with other teams. So to me, I think that would be the edge in an otherwise pretty tight series.
Well, I'm hoping they maybe replicate 2018 against Nashville, and they go and win on the road in a game 7. But you mentioned that it would be a successful year if the Jets even made it to a game 7 against Vegas, or even won like the series. But there's a lot of rumors around this team going forward, with basically a lot of their key players: Scheifele, Dubois, Hellebuyck, Wheeler, Nina Ryder. I think there's a couple more too that are essentially UFAs at the end of the year in the case of Dubois. How different do you think this Jets team will look going into next season?
Vastly different. Oh yeah. Like, I mean, if you were to ask me to guess, I think Pierre-Luc Dubois, Mark Scheifele, and Connor Hellebuyck, at least 2 of them have new homes next year.
Wow.
Just because unless these guys are willing to sign long-term deals, and you look at, what Connor Hellebuyck might fetch. I mean, you have Elliot Friedman writing, he talks to a lot of GMs around the league, writing about how Connor Hellebuyck's going to be the highest paid goalie, in his next contract. Well, are the Jets even in a position to pay Connor Hellebuyck $10+ million for 7 or 8 years? Like, they've never done that in the past. I mean, a lot of people say you wouldn't want to do that. I mean, he's going to, Connor Hellebuyck is definitely has some good years in him. Does he have 8 good years in him at 10 million, per season?
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to determine what the Jets have. Mark Scheifele. Like, Mark Scheifele is going to be demanding a raise. I mean, he's going to want upwards of $9-10 million for his next deal. And Pierre-Luc Dubois, I mean, with all the talk about Montreal and him wanting to play elsewhere, I mean, that feels very real. And so I think there's a reason why this playoffs for the Winnipeg Jets is kind of being dubbed the last dance, because even when you talk to players who aren't those guys, they're aware of the contracts, they're aware of the situation, they're aware that the NHL is a business, and that you got to make the right decision for yourself. And it looks like when you couple that with the fact that the 3 players I talked about, obviously Dubois hasn't been here nearly as long as the other 2 in Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele, and Blake Wheeler for that matter. I mean, he's got another year on his deal, but there's good reason to believe he won't be back next season. They tried to trade him over last off season. Like, are they going to try to do that again? Is he going to want to return? All these different things. So that's why I think a lot of those players are building their legacy in Winnipeg. Not entirely, but in some cases, big part of is going to be determined in this playoffs, is how they're going to be remembered in Winnipeg. And I think that's a big advantage to Winnipeg, because those players want to be well remembered here. They want to be well liked in this city, and a long playoff run, a successful playoff run, will go a long way to solidifying that legacy, if and when you make some tough decisions this offseason that sees a couple go, leave through the door, potentially all of them.
I guess to follow up on that, my question would be, is Kevin Cheveldayoff, a lot of people wanted him to blow up the team last summer, and he didn't, after a disappointing year. And they kind of, I don't even know if they retooled, they just ran it back. Do you think that they'll go in the rebuilding phase in terms of just selling off for assets, or do you think it'll be more of, let's get like NHL players and still be maybe not a playoff team, but a competitive team in Winnipeg?
I think ideally for the Jets organization, they would want the closest thing to a rebuild. I mean, I think so if you were to trade some of those players, I think they would want, again, in an ideal situation, is this likely? Probably not. It can be very difficult to get somebody of similar caliber of a Connor Hellebuyck, for instance. I mean, if you get rid of if you trade Connor Hellebuyck, over the summer, you better get a good goalie back. I mean, I don't think you can do a lot of retooling if you don't have a good goalie. Like, if you want to rebuild, you're going to get picks, right? So I think ideally the Jets would want to be competitive for years to come. If you look at Kevin Cheveldayoff's contract, And I don't know if I said rebuild at the start. I'm confusing myself now. But what I meant by that was I
Lord.
think they want to get closest to not rebuilding. They
Okay.
want to have a couple more years. So I think I said rebuild. So I'll take that back. I didn't mean rebuild. I meant they want to be continuing to build their team to be a competitive unit. If you look at Kevin Shevell, he's got like 2 or 3 more years left on his deal. I'm not 100% sure the Jets want to go through Kevin Cheveldayoff with a rebuild. Like, I don't understand why you would have somebody, a GM, here for 12 years, say they get bounced in the first round of the playoffs this year, to win 3 playoff series in 12 years and then be in charge of an entirely new rebuild. Like, you'd kind of want to have your GM that you saw long term, and that very well could be Kevin Cheveldayoff, right? But just with being in a performance results based business, unless the Jets can do something fairly special, I think Kevin Cheveldayoff has to have a hot seat. But I think if you're getting rid of those kind of caliber players, you might want to get players back in return, players that can play now, who can be leaders on your team. I just don't know many situations that have teams that they want to get rid of equally good players, right? And in a lot of cases, like you saw with the Patrick Laine and Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, you needed kind of 2 disgruntled players to trade for each other. Now look at Pierre-Luc Dubois now. I mean, he kind of wants to leave now too. So the reality is, I think it's going to depend on, it's going to be an incredibly interesting summer. It's going to depend on what they can get for those players, assuming that they want to trade those players. Because at this point in time, there's nothing that you can really, point to and say that this is a definite path of course here, because we've seen them run it back a bunch of times. Like it makes you feel like if they can get through one series here, like even if they get through one series and get bounced in whatever 4 or 5 games in the second round, it just, I get a lot of emails, and I tend to, I don't know if concern is the right word for me, but tend to agree or think that it's a possibility that the management buys into the fact they have, they want to go back again and try this over. And I just don't think that's going to be something that's going to breed success. I don't think they're going to have that opportunity. So if they do end up making trades and they can't get players, but they can get picks, I think you'll have that answer that they're going to be, the Jets have had a pretty decent scouting department. They've been able to find, good pieces, particularly in the first round. So if they can collect more of those pieces, I think it'll be inevitable to have a rebuild. Some might argue a retool, because you're going to have players like Nikolai Ehlers, you're going to have Josh Morrissey, you're going to have Kyle Connor, you're going to have talented players. Whether that's enough to compete for a playoff spot and do well in the playoffs, I'm not sure, but that will determine probably whether it's a retool or a rebuild.
Yeah, no, for sure. It sounds as though it's probably pretty hard to do a retool, but they'll do their best to do it, even though it might be the best course of action to just strip it to the bone if they think they can't get anything back, like a Pierre-Luc Dubois trade for Laine. I guess before I let you go, I want to ask, do you have a Stanley Cup pick? Who is it? And please don't be the Leafs.
Yeah, so I got 2 teams out of so I just think Boston's just been too good this year.
Okay.
They're just too deep. They have 2 great goaltenders. They certainly have a defensive group that's strong. Forwards are there. I mean, this is the year for them. It just feels like this is Boston's year to lose. So I have them coming out of the East, and out of the West, I have the Dallas Stars.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I just think if they can get past Mini in the first round and aren't too beat up, I think they can take Colorado. I think Colorado is a beatable team this year. Losing Gabriel Landeskog for the playoffs was a big blow to them. That would have been a massive injection of energy. I mean, they've had players out now for a little bit. Cale Makar has been out of the lineup for a while. I mean, I'm sure he'll be back eventually, but I just for some reason feel that Dallas is built to be that team. I think Ottinger's figured it out in net. Certainly, he's going to be a factor in this playoffs, and I just like the style of play in which they bring. They can score, but they're very tight defensively, and it's those tight defensive teams and hard checking teams that almost have opportunistic scoring that tend to prevail. So I just have this weird feeling about the Dallas Stars, and certainly probably like a lot of people feel like the Boston Bruins are going to come out of the East, and then I have Boston probably winning in 6 or 7.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna just ask you who did you have winning that series. Lastly, the floor is yours. What are you working on going forward? Any pieces, anything you want to plug for the listeners from the Winnipeg Free Press?
You know, it's like with Jets right now, like this is the fun part of the season. It's all hands on deck for Jets playoffs. My colleague Mike McIntyre is there for game 1 and 2. I'll be supporting him through that. Certainly we'll be at the games, game 3 and 4, and then you know if they make it to game 5, I'll be there, and then Free Press will have that covered. But it's I say it's a fun time because it's like 22 days from Bombers training camps, and so it's like I'm looking forward to the Jets run here, but I'm you know, as long as that may be, but I'm certainly looking forward to Bombers. So a lot of the same. Just you know, we're gonna have full coverage of this Jets run here. It's gonna be an exciting. Hopefully, it's an exciting run. Hopefully, they can push Vegas, maybe even get over the top and get into a second round, because I know how exciting the city's going to be for as long as they're in the playoffs. So the longer, the better, for sure.
No, for sure. I'm hoping the same thing as a big Jets fan. I hope they go. I feel optimistic in this series. I don't think I like them if they were to win this series very much. I'm thankful they're not playing Connor McDavid. I was pretty petrified for a
Yeah.
couple of days that they'd play them. So I'm gonna definitely check out your work at the Free Press, and really excited to see what happens for you in the rest of the year, and then obviously with the Bromers. And thanks so much for coming on, Jeff.
Alex, thanks a lot for having me on, man. This was a blast.